You're listening to Interfering Neurotic with me, Dr. Ash King, and mindfulness coach Daron Larson, where we navigate a life lived with the curses and blessings of big feelings. Coming up, we explore the reality show that is US politics and how we feel about it, the Big Five personality test, and what ingredients make for a neurotic individual, art and creativity as a safe space for the emotional experience, the benefits of being more objective to our subjective experiences, and the pros and cons of sharing our feelings and struggles with the wider world. Here we are, we're back, episode 2, Interfering Neurotic. Hello, Daron. You're in a different country to me, and people are having feelings about what's going on there at the moment. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. People are having feelings. I have a range of feelings being expressed by my people. So yeah, I'm fine. I'm pretty good. It's, of course, disheartening, but yeah, I guess everyone's probably talking about it, right? The whole world's talking about it.
There's some sentiments that it's like the end of days. It's like
Uh-huh.
literally the Handmaid's Tale is about to be fully realized. And, obviously I understand I don't want to minimize anything. Look, I have to out myself here. I have always been someone to kind of shy away from the political realm. And I know that that's steeped in privilege, and I know that I can afford to do that because I live in a country where all my basic needs are taken care of. But I think this really brings into focus the people that are very passionate about how we run our world and how we run our systems.
Yeah. My take is I feel relieved to hear that actually. I'm not surprised, but relieved to hear. I do not orient my life around politics, and I kind of refuse to. I don't make a big deal about that, and I certainly care. But you know what? I vote consistently. I will always vote the same way. I resent having 24/7 4 year, like as soon as someone is in office, they're campaigning. They're never not campaigning, and I don't need that. I also feel like there's this, I'm outing myself. I'm not a sports fan. I'm glad you guys have fun. I'm glad it makes lots of money. I feel nothing. I feel nothing. I don't know where this fits on
I'm
neuroticism,
glad you
but
I'm glad you guys have fun.
you guys have fun, but can't we all just enjoy the fun of playing? Why does it have to be like something like even the Olympics? I'm not fun to have around for your Olympics parties because I feel like 1 second separates someone who's worthy of praise from a loser, and that's not the way I see the world.
Mhm.
But with the American politics, I do think that there has been this unfortunate reality show element that I am afraid we're gonna have to live with. I don't love it. I don't love reality shows. I don't love them in the same way I don't love sports. So it's something I don't care. I don't care about amping up tension to call that reality. Editing the world, editing things and pushing people's buttons. It's like I'm afraid that this whole reality show mentality that we're steeped in makes us confused about, I don't know, what would you say? Something like the most difficult personalities are the most dramatic. So they seem to represent something that I don't see out in the world in my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
I don't experience the kind of conflict that I see in the news. In the United States, I don't know how it is where you are. There's city people and city sensibilities, even in a smaller town like Columbus, Ohio, which is not huge. It's a middle-sized city. It's got lots of stuff. But we're city people with college educations, and we like to go to shows and concerts. But there is a large part of our country that do not identify as city people. And I really think that's a divide that drives a lot of this. I come from Kansas, which is almost a punchline to tell people where you're from, because then I always have to hear about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. And it's like, it hasn't been funny for decades, but okay, I'm from Kansas. I moved to Ohio to raise my daughter. These are not sexy American states or cities, right? I am totally at home wherever I am. And that's a goal for me. I want my happiness not to depend on location, political party, who got elected, who won the Super Bowl. That's not how I orient my life.
Mhm.
I also have a soft spot. Like, well, is that true in Sydney, is it, or in Australia, is there a divide? Do you have the country people, the rural people, and the city people, and then there's a tension there?
Yes, definitely. And there's various states, similar to America, where people have different sensibilities overall, and there's certain stereotypes that link up with a few different parts of the country. So I don't think that it's quite as stark. I actually am almost finishing reading An Education by Tara Westover. It's like a memoir book, and I don't know if
Yeah.
you've heard of it. Reading for a book club at the moment, and she lives in like rural Idaho. And honestly, I think she had quite a unique upbringing with
Mm,
a fundamentalist Mormon father who thought the end of days was coming. But her experience of life, it's as if she was from a different planet.
yeah.
And just thinking, oh, she's an American. Like,
I know,
but
doesn't it funny who represents America, right? Well, the thing is to have a reality show, to have a best-selling book, to have a TV series, drama. There has to be
it
drama.
has to be
So we're not
extreme.
There has to be. And so we're not going to say, okay, who is making good choices? Let's see if we can. No one wants to watch that.
It's the same as the content that's amplified online. The things that go
Exactly.
viral, the things that pop off are the things that are on the extreme ends. And no one's
Totally.
really oversharing all of these really nuanced and mindful opinions and takes because that doesn't get the clicks.
No, it doesn't. Oh my gosh, I have a lot to say about this. I'm surprised I actually have a lot to say about this. But so back to like coming from Kansas. So my husband went to school in New York City. So we go to these amazing reunions. It's who doesn't want to go to New York City? I mean, I'm right. But when we go there, I have degrees from state colleges, basically in the Midwest. That's not impressing anyone in New York City. And the people in New York City, it's all about it's really lead with your resume and really impressive, intelligent, innovative folks, very intimidating. Like Barack Obama went to the same school. So it's like, okay. But anyway, so they'll ask us, so where are you guys based? That's how they phrase it, right? And we'll say, we live in Ohio. Invariably, the response is, why? So I have this little soft spot for people who live somewhere that people in LA, New York, and DC say, why would you want to live there? There's something that gets old after a while to be considered this sort of not really welcome to the table in the same way. So it's kind
Hmm.
of, I don't know. So that part I kind of get. I kind of get the dynamic. I certainly want to be clear. I would never condone. I'm shocked that this is happening, but I'm also fascinated by how you take a narcissistic character who has a reality show reputation and kind of charms all these people and says, I see your pain. I see that you're suffering and you're not getting any validation of that. And totally exploits that. I'm
Hmm.
fascinated by that dynamic, and I I have this kind of goal. I don't want to hate people for falling under the spell of that kind of manipulation. I wish there was a way, and I don't think politics is the place, unfortunately, to get at, can we get at the layer below the political agenda? But I am fascinated how hard it is to see another human being because of the story I'm telling myself about that human being. I don't represent all gay, monogamous, married grandfathers, but I sometimes wonder if I might. I don't know. I don't know. We don't have conferences.
We have to
But
do a
anyway,
poll. Yeah.
I can tell you if I have lunch with you, I will find common ground with you. And I
Mhm.
don't really care where you live or where you're from.
Mhm.
I'm interested. And I really do think people, for the most part, are that way in person,
Mhm.
but not online and not in this unfortunate political discourse that we have.
I am on some of the dating apps. I will out myself here right now. And one of the things you can list is your sort of political affiliation. So you can say that you're liberal or you're conservative. And I find it so fascinating because you can also hide it. So you don't see anything. And you can also say not political, which I don't put, even though I generally consider myself not political.
Mm,
It represents something to say that you're not political. And if you're going to put
mm,
that on a profile where people don't know you from Adam and they're just going to sum up who you are, not political makes a statement, conservative makes a statement, liberal
totally.
makes a statement. And from the people that I've met so far, I have kind of said, honestly, my like political leanings are that they feel like one of the least interesting things about me. And maybe
Same.
that's luxurious for me to say, but I am fascinated by the types of features of our identity that we cling to and that we think help us understand ourselves and help
Mm.
us understand one another and form these groups and form these bonds. Let's dive into our Big Five personality assessment. So, in our last episode, we called out for everyone to go and take the Big Five personality test. And across the Big Five personality assessment, it's sort of the gold standard of personality assessment in a lot of psychometric testing. And there's features here which a lot of people, I would say, would really think this kind of sums up a lot of who I am. So across the big five, you have extroversion, the extroversion scale, how gregarious and loud and comfortable are you with social interaction and amongst other people. Then you've got your conscientiousness scale, which is sort of how organized and diligent you are, how task oriented and motivated you are. You've got your agreeableness scale, which is how friendly and agreeable you are with other people. You've got your openness scale, which is about experimenting, trying new things, doing things differently. And finally, you have your neuroticism scale, which is the one that we're going to be focusing
Yay.
on today. All right, so Daron, tell me what was your overall neuroticism scale?
It
Your
was a
percentage, sorry.
61. Yeah, it was 61%. And I was going to ask you if that's considered high. I know, I think I told you maybe 10 years ago I took this test and it was much high. It was much closer to, I want to say 80, maybe 75, something like that.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't know what's considered high. How do they decide? Or it's
Well,
not.
everyone can decide in a different way. It's dependent on the researchers and the research question and what they're actually looking for. I would say that for our benefit, for our just like layperson assessments here today, we'll have a look at anything that tips over 50. So 50,
Okay.
obviously, you're like on the top of the bell curve. On average, that's where most people score on the neuroticism scale. But once we get down to the other end, so my percentage is 71. And I'd agree with you in that I think 10 years ago, I would have gotten much higher, potentially even in the 90s. So there's been a
Mm,
lot of, the learning curve of understanding myself, understanding the ways that I feel. So I might just give a bit of a summary as to
mm.
how neuroticism is kind of understood or quantified within this big five
It's a
test.
scary word, right? It's got negative connotations. Yeah, yeah. Tell me what it means.
Yeah, so they kind of say low emotional stability, which feels like a dig to me. I feel like I feel like people are coming for me with that. And it's sort of a tendency towards things like anxiety, irritability, immoderation, self-consciousness, depressivity, and vulnerability. We're going to have a look at each of those subtraits. And of course, these all exist on a spectrum. But this test kind of says, all right, if you're higher in neuroticism, you're probably the sort of person who worries a lot about things. You're probably easily upset or get stressed out easily. You have big mood swings or frequent mood swings. You get irritated or bugged pretty easily. You often feel low or downhearted. And maybe you feel like you struggle to bounce back after hard stuff happens. So, general, all of those things have negative connotations in our
Yeah.
culture, at least, and can often be used as an insult. I can see that, oh my God, you worry so much, or what, you're so fragile, or you're such a drama queen. All of these sort of phrases, and they're not meant as terms of endearment, right?
Right, right, right. And you're reminding me of the 80s for my high school years and my, college years. What you just described was like, I think I could have been a textbook example of high levels of all of those things and really taking, I think with that intensity comes sort of taking things personally and being overwhelmed and feeling sort of like, do I belong here? Those are the kind of things that come up in my mind when you're listing those kinds of aspects of how did you phrase it? Low emotional
Emotional
stability?
stability.
Stability, yeah. What is
Yes.
this? What is an emotional stable? Well, actually, I was going to ask what's an emotionally stable person look like, but I guess it's that you're not as thrown off by these kinds of unpleasant moods and things, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of see an unbothered person, like a chilled, laid back. I always am like, I aspire to be laid back. Like, can I be the laid back girl? And I thought that that was my quest, to get to know myself, to learn different skills and strategies. I was like, wow, I'm gonna go from being this neurotic, highly sensitive character to actually just being this relaxed, nothing bothers me,
I
delusional.
So how do you frame it now? Because I always hoped I would have less. The other thing we have to say, I was a musician in high school. You were a professional musician.
Hmm.
And there are places where we fit in with the moodiness, I think, where it's almost expected. Well, who are you to be a musician if you're not going to feel dark moods or inspired by some of these things? Does that relate in your experience as well? Like feeling like it was a place to be it was a good place to be neurotic.
I
I don't
think
know.
in creative spaces, there's somewhat of a greater acceptance and understanding. I remember feeling that way in high school, actually, when, I landed on, Leonard Cohen and Sylvia Plath and all of the other intensely emotional and dramatic types of creators. And suddenly I was like, wow, I feel quite seen. And I feel like these people, they aren't making me feel ashamed for being this way. And
Mm,
we started talking today about the power of being seen when people go, I see what you're going through, or I see how hard life is for you, or I see the sort of person that you are, and it's okay. I'm not going to make you feel ashamed, or I'm not going to make you feel like you need to change in order to belong. So that's why I've always felt more at home in creative
mm.
spaces or with other creative people.
Yeah, for sure. And there's something about those moods that I think steered me in the direction of poetry, being interested in poetry, meditation, paradox, literature. Like there's something missing. I'm not getting the answers in school from math and science and drier quantitative things. So I've always been more drawn to how do I respond to this aspect of me? The other thing, I'm curious to hear what you think about this because we both kind of mentioned that over time, it sounds like we've sort of moderated our emotional stability or, our neuroticism. Is it considered something that is relatively fixed? I think what I hear is you're saying, I'm going to have strong feelings and that's just part of my composition. But there is some wiggle room that I can respond to those emotions differently and sort of turn those into actually strengths and things I'm proud of that I actually feel add to my life. Is that
Yes.
kind of how you see it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what was interesting about the assessment itself is that a lot of the questions spoke to the emotional experience, but then a bunch of them also spoke to the behavioral experience. That is what we do in response to having these feelings. And for the
Mm,
most part, we're not ever taught, unless we have very, like parents who are very mindful with very high EQ, who have access to a lot of strategies and can
mm,
understand different types of minds. Most of us have to work it out ourselves because we have to work
mm-hmm,
ourselves out and then we have to
mm-hmm,
work out, okay, what am I going to do with this? In terms of what neuroticism is when it shows up in a lot of the research papers and in the literature of psychology, they tend to see correlations between higher levels of neuroticism being associated with greater risk of mental illness, worse outcomes on measures of health and relationship satisfaction. So these are all things that we don't
mm-hmm,
want to
mm-hmm.
feel like we're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from a mental illness. We don't want to feel like our health is impaired and that our relationships are going to suffer because of this immovable trait that we carry within ourselves. We need to mention, why would people be neurotic at all? What is the advantage of human
Mm,
evolution to carry these types of traits of being a warrior and you know feeling very sensitive to the world around us, having these big emotions? And it is generally considered in the evolutionary psychology space that people who had these traits were important to communities in our human
Mm,
evolution because they gave us a sensitivity to threats.
mm,
So
mm.
they would make sure, oh, actually, maybe we shouldn't set up camp here because something might go wrong, or this could be potentially dangerous. Let's reconsider how we're going to be doing that. So you might not have needed a whole community of people who were like that, but you did
Mm.
need some people who were like that so that we can potentially live to see another day and have more babies and continue passing our genes down.
Well, that makes sense. And I also think there's something about maybe the contribution of some kind of caring for if I'm anxious, I see that you're anxious. Is there something I can do to help? There's something about it's not just about me. There that could benefit the tribe as well to have
Yes.
someone, the caregivers, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I guess this is the genetic part as to I would say that if most of us are scoring high on neuroticism, we probably don't have an entire family line of people of zero people who are neurotic. Like I would say, my sister, for instance, seems would score very low on the neuroticism scale.
Mm,
One of my sisters, however, my mum would score very high. So I could see maybe the genetic lineage of that. However, of course, environment shapes these sorts of traits and the
sure.
manifestation of these traits too. So the way that we were raised, the types of parenting or caregiving that we've received, the types of life that we've lived, and the challenges that we've faced. So whilst it is a relatively stable trait, there is definitely some malleability, which can see that we might move, across the spectrum, maybe
Hmm.
not going from a 70% to a 10%.
Right,
we
right.
wouldn't go down that far, but there's also, things that show. I just read a research paper this morning about people who go to military service and their neuroticism levels increase whilst they're
Oh,
there on it, right? So that makes complete sense, wouldn't it? That you,
sure,
you become
sure.
more hyper vigilant when you're in that environment. So actually, our bodies engage this capacity in a way to go, I need to be able to take care of myself and I need to be able to take care of my people.
Right. It's a caring. It's sort of a caring. I can see it as having a role to play in caring. I can also, in your description, I can imagine if I had not found tools, my score would be much higher now than it is. So I really think that is I think that emotional awareness, how we respond to our emotions, to me, I'm sensitive, but that's not the end of the story because I can work on that. And the more I pay attention, the more I notice. It's actually fascinating to me to at this point in my life, my unpleasant moods are much more interesting to me. They would have been intimidating and overwhelming when I was younger. I would have taken an identity based on them. Oh my gosh, I'm an anxious person. Oh my gosh, I worry. And at this stage in my life, because of significant lessons learned, context, support, and tools, really, tools and habits, I feel like I have a different set of ways of observing my feelings as opposed to just forming an identity around fighting with them. Does that?
That makes complete sense. And it's so much of what therapeutic modalities hope to target. Because, we might understand that our eyes are there for us to see and our nose is here for us to smell. We understand these sense organs
Hmm.
and what their purpose is. However, the feeling experience is a lot more in the dark. Like you can't see someone's feeling organs like you can see someone's nose or see someone's ears. So the experience always seems a lot more mysterious and is why I think we can take on a lot of shame or confusion about, well, how is what's going on inside me different or similar to how is
You're right.
what is going on inside you. So I want to jump quickly to
Yeah.
the sub traits of the big five scores. So instead of just getting this blanket score of neuroticism, they break it down into different subcategories. And again, we can talk about how comprehensive we think these different types of subtraits cover the entirety of the neurotic experience. Again, it's very pathologically focused and it very much calls to certain types of traits which we would kind of not really want to be very much. So
Right.
first up is anxiety. right? That refers to the ease with which an individual can be made to feel unsafe and start to worry. What was your anxiety score, Darren?
69.
Okay,
Seems
so
high.
yeah, no, mine was 79, which doesn't surprise
Oh,
me because I am well acquainted with the anxious experience. Again, anxiety exists on its own as, again, like a diagnosable mental health condition across lots of different uh, manifestations, whether it be social
sure.
anxiety or generalized. So after that, it's irritability, which refers to an individual's tendency to become angry and hostile when met with adversity. What was your score on that?
Mine's a 69 for irritability.
Oh, I got the exact
69%.
same. I
Crazy.
got I got that too. Okay, so then we've got immoderation, which is the ease with which an individual yields to temptations or urges.
Oh, I have
Mm.
a 61%. Oh, that's a potentially interesting theme.
Yeah, so
What's
my
yours?
I was 61 as well.
Okay, we're going in a nice little parallel now.
Yeah. Uh, all right. So we'll get back to this because I think that some of these are actually responsiveness uh, measures too. So you can feel like you're so pulled to do something, maybe, eat that
Mm,
piece of cake that you were saving for your partner in the fridge, or pick up your phone and scroll social media when you said you weren't going to have any more phone time in the evening. So what's the difference between the feeling and then the
mm,
action, which is what
right.
the emotional versus the behavioral. Okay, so the next one is self-consciousness, an individual's propensity to experience embarrassment and shame.
Ooh, I'm surprised mine's not higher. It says I'm a 54%, but I would have rated myself higher on that. Embarrassment feels like it's been a huge thing for me, but yeah.
So mine is 55. So again, we're both coming
Okay.
down low. And, this is maybe why we're both here on a podcast talking about our feelings. I think that if we had higher scores, we both would have been like, no, that's not going to happen. That's not an option for me. So that particular subtrait would likely correlate with social anxiety conditions, I would say. All right.
Okay.
So then
Sure.
there's two more. Depressivity is the next one. An individual's inclination to experience low moods, despondency, and despair.
55%.
Okay, so mine's quite a bit higher than yours there. Mine's 73. And finally, vulnerability. Someone's inclination to be overwhelmed by uncertainty and to feel powerless under pressure.
67%.
So mine was the highest that I had out of any of the others, which was 83. And I do wonder if I had taken this test
Uh-huh.
when I wasn't on the back end of a marriage
Sure.
separation that I never asked for, how much do the current conditions shape the way that you respond to these things?
Yep. I wish I had when my life was falling apart when I was getting divorced in the early 90s, I had one of those stress scales and it was like I think I almost blew up the machine. It was so high. Was so high. And literally I was breaking out in red spots all over my body. It's terrible. So I can imagine what my neuroticism score would have been at that time with really probably very few tools at my disposal. Can I ask you a question?
Hmm.
I'm aware most times if I check in with myself emotionally, just kind of do a scan of my body, is there any emotion that I can detect? I would say there is very often a little bit of what I would say falls under this kind of a anxious, fear, vulnerable, embarrassing flavor
Hmm.
that I can pick up on. They're idling at a really low. It's like kind of ready to go if it needs to. So it's kind
Mm.
of there. And I'm wondering if you either relate to that or do you remember when you were more engaged in performing in music, was that more of a thing? Do you remember having a high emotional idol when
Mm.
you were on stage and in the spotlight? Can you remember that?
Yeah, this reminds me of something that I've journaled about before, which is almost like neurotic tinnitus. That
Oh,
idea that
yeah,
almost,
totally.
yeah, it's a feeling experience, but it almost feels like that ever present. And when you focus or when you shift to
Yeah.
look for it, you can find it. At least I can find it. And it sounds like you've had a similar experience.
Yeah.
Back when I was singing, I would have probably topped out some of these sub traits altogether because I
Oh,
didn't have a lot of self-awareness. I just knew that I felt a lot and I didn't really know what to do with it. But I liked I have a tendency to like contained experiences of anxiety. So I love the feeling of standing in the queue waiting to go on a roller coaster, like a really
Ah,
horrible, high, upside down, steep drops roller coaster. I love sitting down and watching a horror film. I love
okay.
when I can put my anxiety to good use.
Ah, and you kind of, but it's like a laboratory. You can have a little bit of control. I was going to say, this is where we're going to part ways because
Mhm.
I'm not going to ride. I'm not going to wait for that ride with you. I'm sorry. We'll catch up on the other side. But no, the movie, I do get that because you can control the levers. How much do I want to take, and I can turn it when the movie's over, it's over.
Yeah.
And you also can control, I'm in a safe place and it's fun. It's fun to
Yes.
get worked up. I think that's what I hear.
Yeah, look, I
Uh,
think that that's where you're stepping away from that vulnerability aspect, right? The uncertainty and powerlessness when you have these sort of contained conditions of
yeah,
anxiety or stimulation. And that was similar to going out on stage for me. I suppose, given that my self-consciousness score was quite low, even though, I do get worried about certain domains that, I could be
sure.
judged. And I definitely did experience those when being a full-time musician. I also liked that feeling of going, oh, I can feel the fear rise up. I can brand it as excitement and I can go out on stage and I can use it because obviously your body is rushed with adrenaline, but it's there to
Right.
serve. It's there to serve.
It's
At
there to be
least,
interpreted. You're right. It's there to be interpreted. That's kind of one of the things that I was thinking we would talk about. I'm so glad we were talking about this. That there's this sensation that I call fear that's idling, but how I interpret that's going to vary by the context.
mhm,
And it's reminding me that I heard Emma Stone talking about acting. She talked about acting on a podcast, and she was talking about how she had anxiety as a young person and was given tools for it. And then she found herself encountering it in her professional career as an actress, being very vulnerable. And I think it might have been Terry Gross was asking her, how do you notice the difference between an anxiety that's an imagined threat that you're not in danger versus the sensation that you're in danger when you're making yourself vulnerable on purpose for the camera?
mhm,
And her answer, which I thought, okay, we could have her on our in our conversation. She said, if you could tell me that, it would make my life a lot easier. I don't know. If I feel the anxiousness, I don't know if this is that little, free floating critter that's making me escalate for no reason,
mhm.
or if this is what it feels like to be a working actress creating an emotion for that's going to live on, right? And I love that answer that we have this fascinating, sophisticated biofeedback device of affect and emotion that we can sense in our body, but it leaves a lot of room for interpretation,
Yes.
and how we might respond to that. So,
Yeah, and I think that it's also a bit delusional to think that it's ever a sort of meter that we can be trained to read flawlessly. Like maybe we can get to
no.
know it a bit better by reading the sensations and going, this is what these sensations generally are telling me about myself or about my environment. But for so much of the past few years in the struggles and difficulties of what was happening within my relationship and my marriage, my anxiety sort of did, take off at times, but I never interpreted it as this is something to do with my relationship, which could have been really useful,
Ah,
given that I could have then
yeah.
gone, let's do something about the relationship. I interpreted it all as a personal flaw or weakness. I said, this is about me and it's about me being unable to parent right and
Ah,
parent while working and being a wife and parent while working while being a wife while doing a PhD. I put it all back on me. And the interpretation then was, how do I deal with that? As opposed to how do I deal with the external situation, which is probably
uh-huh.
contributing mainly to my anxiety.
You think it's just easier to see on reflection. I always find that hindsight can reveal. I see hindsight as a valuable emotional awareness tool, actually, to be able to go, it's like, oh, I can see that more clearly. I think partly what we're talking about, which is one of my favorite themes, is I'm trying to be more objective about my subjective experience, which is I will never be completely objective, but I can learn from what as you're describing. I was adding a layer of expectation and pressure on myself because I didn't know how to interpret that. This must be a lack. This must be something wrong with me.
Hmm.
In hindsight, we can say, if you did not feel if you did not feel anxious during this time, there would be maybe something we should be concerned about.
Mm.
Which I wish we talked more about the fact that the ingredient often in the arts, in parenting, it's not that if you're doing it right, you're going to be comfortable and peaceful and confident and certain. In fact, I think it very often, I'm convinced if Patti LuPone is breaking into a song on the stage and I feel moved, I have a hunch that this is partly the result of her turning her anxious feelings into art. And I get to like sort of just bask in it. I'm convinced that there's a lot of that at work when we're moved. I don't know what you think, but art, acting, movies, music, poetry, there's some pain in what you're describing, pain that was felt and turned into something.
Hmm.
And I kind of hear that maybe there's something that you're doing differently, how you're responding to your pain now. And what happens if I stop taking it as interpreting myself as falling short, but instead of say, oh wow, humans feel feelings that are uncomfortable when when things are going in this direction and I'm not, there's a signal I don't know how to interpret. And so I'm going to default to there must be something wrong with me.
Mm.
What if I interrogate that read and say, maybe this is what it feels like to be spread too thin or have too much on my plate or this is a season in my life where I'm going to do all these things but it's not permanent and it's not my identity. It's
Hmm.
just as a kind of a emerges out of wow, that you were up to a lot. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you did it.
But back then, when I was doing it, I again was just so critical of myself in that I
Mm,
wasn't able to feel better whilst doing it. And a lot of
hmm.
people tried to bring it to my attention, and I didn't want to hear it because I was
Ah,
so committed to, I suppose, understanding myself as someone who lacked the capacity to deal with my emotions, not
hmm.
lacked the capacity to understand, wow, this is how things feel when a lot's going on. And I think that there's more words becoming available for us
Mm.
now to connect to certain types of emotional experiences. Things like burnout. Like, remember when you just would never hear the phrase burnout? Now we can go,
Right.
okay, burnout is something that we understand some people feel when they are overwhelmed by how much they've got on their plate. And we can start to get a little bit more granular with our emotional language and understanding our emotional experience. I actually think that's a whole other episode. So,
I love emotional granularity. I did want to say though, in my work, I often find that people come to me because let's say their anxiety has helped them get a PhD, and now they're on the other side of it, and they're like, I don't want that anymore. Like the emotional push served them
yeah,
to stay focused and to completion, and then they're left with now what am I supposed to do with that impulse?
yeah.
So
Turn it off. When
I,
just turn it off. Like,
but I'm fascinated by that. There's a kind of what helps us get through can also become we can outgrow it and want less of it or want to regulate it in some different way.
wanting to control almost like we have the little levers to be like, okay,
Yeah,
and I do this
yeah,
a lot when I'm doing workshops on stress because a lot of people hear the word stress and they're like, oh, yuck, horrible, I don't want that. We're just like, no, actually, it's healthy functioning when we're stressed at certain points when we should be stressed because what stress does to our bodies is it helps us face challenges or obstacles. It's when it becomes a hindrance or a chronic condition that we just don't know how to manage within our bodies that it becomes a
yeah,
problem. And again, we're very rarely taught or shown how to be stressed, like how to be stressed well.
exactly. And we play our card. People, we don't see how someone else is navigating some internal, subjective, emotional experience because they might be look composed on the outside. Yeah, I love this idea from Lisa Feldman Barrett. She said that sometimes that distress is a signal that there's something wrong. I need to do something.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's a signal of you're learning something new. You're doing something difficult. This is
Hmm.
exactly how it feels to be destabilized in that way, right? To not know something and have to figure it out, to sort it out in school, in relationship, how to navigate the outcomes of an election. I don't know how. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It means there's an opportunity. This is what it feels like to be a human facing an unknown and learning their way through it,
Mhm.
right? It takes the pressure off.
If we can remind ourselves of that in those situations and not necessarily see it as much of a deficiency, and also bring that self-compassion piece back in and go, it's hard to feel this way, like not going, you're stupid for feeling this way or you should feel less of this way, just acknowledging
Right,
that sometimes just the emotional experience itself, without whatever
right,
challenges you've got happening in the world around you,
completely.
is hard to hold.
Exactly. There's a universe. It would, if we took, thousands of people and put them in this scenario, it would skew very heavily. They would feel something like what I feel based on how my five traits spill out, right?
Mhm.
But there would be we could have coffee and say, "Oh my gosh, do you feel that?" "Oh yeah, I feel it too." Yet we often are trying to navigate these things kind of in a vacuum or by ourselves, privately struggling or dealing with how to make sense of these signals.
Yes, yes. And I think as well we find it much easier if there's a shared lived experience that we can connect with. And I will say that I remember when people were sharing, I kind of knew subtly that someone was going through a relationship breakdown. They'd be sharing all of these memes and quotes and poems on their social media, and you're kind of like, "Oh, that's a bit tragic." And then fast forward, that was basically me for the last 6 months. And going, wow, I see those people and what they were
Ah,
doing in a completely different
yeah,
light now, because I feel like
totally.
their insides were the same as what my insides are now, and it invites me to have a little bit more empathy. And I think that if we
Yeah.
make an effort, most of us can go, well, maybe we haven't had a husband who's left us after 10 years, but maybe we've had another experience in a different context, which has gone, this is how it feels to be abandoned. This is how it feels like
Hmm.
for someone that you love to walk away. And just taking on a kernel of that memory of that feeling experience may allow us to meet each other with a little bit more compassion and understanding.
I love turning emotional awareness into fuel for empathy. It's exactly. And that's what art does too, I hope. I know we're probably running out of time, but there was something I wanted to say about being older. I do sometimes look out because I try to stay up to date with how people are conveying things on social media, right? And I do feel like we've lost something and gained something by the public display of working through some things. You know, when I was young, it would be so offensive if someone would read your journal. And now we live in a time and now we're offended if you're not basically reading my journal. Why aren't you following along with my ups and downs? Right. And I think there's something good about the fact that we can now put some of this out there. But I also do for some people, and maybe it's also the younger. I wish there was some guidance on it's okay to sit with it and write it down and sit with it for a while and take it out, look at it with hindsight, and then share. It will still be valuable to
Mm.
other people. But that's a very sophisticated kind of improvisation to navigate, especially when there's so much kind of I get it. I get it. I want to get it out there now and get an audience to it.
Let's end the episode here because I want that to be what we talk about in our next episode. Given I spent 3.5 years
Perfect.
doing a PhD on authenticity, on how we share and what we disclose
Yes.
about ourselves, it's so fascinating to me as well. The idea that, who has the privilege of understanding and getting insight into your inner world, getting
Yes.
insight into your
Yep.
suffering, getting insight into your struggles. And I think that we have a stage, a global stage, to put all of this now. And so, what are the benefits? What are the risks? And maybe how are we doing ourselves a service or disservice by doing it? Let's leave it there.
I can't wait. Yes, yes, please.
Same.
Next time. Okay. All right.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Ash.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you soon.